Good afternoon. Today I'm going to read the last 10 pages of the Red Book by Dr. C.G. Jung, the Reader's Edition, and so I'll be beginning on page 543. But before I begin, while I'm waiting for a few listeners to gather, I'm going to go ahead and read the footnotes that go with this page so that when I get to the end, which is a true punchline, I won't have to go back and interrupt your chain of thought on that. And so, as with the 7 Sermons of the Dead, this segment of the Red Book is an act of imagination that is going on between Dr. Jung's conscious mind, his ego self, and his unconscious. And there are figures in the unconscious that are communicating with him, talking to him. And these are actual human figures. And so what I'm going to do is, first of all, read these footnotes and then go back and read the actual portion of the Red Book. So he's communicating with these unconscious figures, and in the text he says, he's trying to decide whether the unconscious figures should know what is, and he says, do you ultimately deny what is? The footnote reads, in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung stated, the figures of the unconscious are also uninformed and need man or contact with consciousness in order to attain knowledge. When I began working with the unconscious, I found myself much involved with the figures of Salome and Elijah. Then they receded, but after about 2 years they reappeared. To my complete astonishment, they were completely unchanged. They spoke and acted as if nothing had happened in the meanwhile. In actuality, the most incredible things had taken place in my life. I had, as it were, to begin from the beginning again, to tell them all about what had been going on, and explaining things to them. At the time, I had been greatly surprised by this situation. Only later did I understand what had happened in the interval. The two had sunk back into the unconscious and into themselves. I might equally put it into timelessness. They remained out of contact with the I and the I's changing circumstances, and therefore were ignorant of what had happened in the world of consciousness. And Dr. Shamdasani says, this is from pages 338 to 339 of Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and he says this passage seems to refer to this paragraph. And then there's a couple other footnotes. And these imaginations took place between May 3rd and May 31st, 1916. So right in the middle of World War I, just to give you a context in terms of the European War. In other words, this is before the American legions arrived in Europe to help the British and the French. Now, later on in this, you will hear a reference to the blue shade. And in Black Book number 6, according to the footnote, the shade is identified as Christ. And then this footnote. Philemon is trying to understand or he's communicating with the shade, and he's trying to understand whether they're in the garden of Simon and Helena or whether they are in Christ's garden. And so the footnote reads, Simon Magus, 1st century, was a magician. In the Acts of the Apostles, 8:9 through 24, after becoming a Christian, he wished to purchase the power of transmitting the Holy Spirit from Peter and Paul. Jung saw this account as a caricature. Further accounts of him are found in the apocryphal Acts of Peter and in writings of the Church Fathers. He has been seen as one of the founders of Gnosticism, and in the 2nd century, a Simonian sect arose. He is said to have always traveled with a woman whom he found in a brothel in Tyre, who was the reincarnation of Helen of Troy. Jung cited this as an example of the anima figure. And then a little further along it says, and since you come forward, we take you in. It is our garden that surrounds you. So meaning it's not Christ's garden. And so in Memories, Jung commented, in such dream wandering, one frequently encounters an old man who is accompanied by a young girl, and examples of such couples are to be found in many mythic tales. Thus, according to monastic tradition, Simon Magus went about with a young girl whom he had picked up in a brothel. Her name was Helen, and she was regarded as the reincarnation of the Trojan Helen. Klingsor and Kundry, Lao Tzu, and the dancing girl likewise belong in this category. And also, regarding the Serpent Allegory in this reading, Jung commented on the serpent as an allegory of Christ in Ion, Collected Works 9:2, paragraph 369, 385, and 390. Okay, so now I'm going to go back and do the reading in earnest. And so again, we're in an active imagination between Dr. Jung and his unconscious figures. On a night when everything was silent, I heard a murmur like that of many voices, and a bit more clearly I heard the voice of Philemon, and it was as if he were giving a speech. And as I listened more closely, I heard his words. Quote, afterward, when I had impregnated the dead body of the underworld, and when it had given birth to the serpent of the god, I went to men and saw the fullness of their affliction and their madness. I saw that they were slaying each other, and that they sought the grounds for their actions. They did this because they did not have anything different to do. They did this because they did not have anything different or better to do. But because they were accustomed to doing nothing for which they could not account, they devised reasons that compelled them to go on killing. We're talking about World War I now. Stop. You are out of your minds, said the sage. Stop, for heaven's sake, and take stock of what damage you have done, said the canny one. But the fool laughed, since honors had been conferred upon him overnight. Why do men not see their stupidity? Stupidity is a daughter of the god. Therefore, men cannot stop murdering, since thus they serve the serpent of the god without knowing it. It is worth giving one's life for the sake of serving the serpent of the god. Hence be reconciled, but it would be far better to live despite the god. But the serpent of the god wants human blood. This feeds it and makes it shine. Not wanting to murder and die amounts to deceiving the god. Whoever lives has become one who deceives the god. Whoever lives invents his life for himself, but the serpent wants to be deceived out of hope for blood. The greater the number of men who stole their lives from the gods, the greater the harvest feeding the serpent from the blood-sown field. The god grows strong through human murder. The serpent grows hot and fiery through the drenching blood. Its fat burns in the blazing flame. The flame becomes the light of men, the first ray of a renewed sun. He, the first appearing light. I could not grasp what else Philemon said. I spent a long time pondering his words, which evidently he had spoken to the dead, and I was horrified by the atrocities that attend the rebirth of a god. And soon afterward I saw Elijah and Salome in a dream. Elijah appeared concerned and alarmed. Therefore, when in the following night that light was extinguished and every living sound fell still, I called Elijah and Salome so that they would answer my questions. Elijah came forward and said, I have become weak. I am poor, and excess of my power has gone to you, my son. You took too much from me. You went too far away from me. I heard strange and incomprehensible things, and the peace of my depths became disturbed. I asked, but what did you hear? What voice did you hear? Elijah answered, I heard a voice full of confusion, and an alarmed voice full of warning and the incomprehensible. What did it say? I asked. Did you hear the words? Indistinctly. It was confused and confusing. The voice spoke first of a knife cutting something, or perhaps harvesting, perhaps the grapes that go to the winepress. Perhaps the one wearing the red robe treads the winepress from which the blood flows. Thereupon the voice spoke of gold that lies below and that kills whoever touches it. Then it mentioned fire and burns terribly, and that should flare up in our time. And then there was a malicious word that I would rather not utter. A malicious word? What was it? I asked. He answered, a word about the death of God. There is only one God, and God cannot die. Then I replied, I am astounded, Elijah. Do you not know what happened? Do you not know that the world has put on a new garb? That the one God has gone away, and that in turn many gods and many demons have come to man? Truly, I am surprised. I am extremely surprised. How could you not have known? Know you nothing of the new that has come to pass? Yet you know the future. You have foresight. Or maybe you should not know what is. Do you ultimately deny what is? Okay. Salome interrupted me. What is gives no pleasure. Pleasure comes only from the new. Your soul would also like a new husband. Ha ha, she loves change. You are not pleasurable enough for her. In that respect, she is unteachable, and therefore you believe she is mad. We love only what is coming, not what is. Only the new gives us pleasure. Elijah does not think about what is, only about what is to come. Therefore, he knows it. I answered, what does he know? He should say. Welcome, everyone. Nice to see you today. This is my dragon teacup. Filled with honey in addition to my tea to keep my voice in good shape. Elijah said, I have already uttered the words. The image that I saw was crimson, fiery colored, a gleaming gold. The voice I heard was like distant thunder, like the wind roaring in the forest, like an earthquake. It was not the voice of my God, but it was a thunderous pagan roar, a call my ancestors knew, but which I have never heard. It sounded prehistoric, as if from a forest on a distant coast. It rang with all the voices of the wilderness. It was full of horror, yet harmonic. To this I replied, My good old man, you heard correctly, as I thought you had. How wonderful! Shall I tell you about it? After all, I told you that the world had acquired a new face, a new cover has thrown over it. How odd that you don't know. Old gods have become new. The one God is dead. Yes, truly he died. He disintegrated into the many, and thus the world became rich overnight. And something also happened to the individual soul. Who would care to describe it? But therefore men too became rich overnight. How is it possible that you didn't know this? The one God became two, a multiple one, whose body consists of many gods, and a single one, whose body is a man, and yet he is brighter and stronger than the sun. What shall I tell you about the soul? Haven't you noticed that she has become multiple? She has become the closest, nearest, near, far, further, furthest, and yet she is one as before. First, she divided herself into a serpent and a bird, then into a father and mother, and then into Elijah and Salome. How are you, my good fellow? Does it disturb you? Yes, you must be realizing that you are already very far removed from me, so that I can hardly reckon you as being part of my soul. Since if you belong to my soul, you would have to know what is happening. Therefore, I must separate you and Salome from my soul and place you among the demons. You are connected to what is primordially old and always exists. Therefore, you also know nothing of the being of men, but simply of the past and future. Nevertheless, it is good that you came to my call. Take part in that which is, for what is ought to be such that you can take part in it. But Elijah sullenly replied, I do not like this multiplicity. It is not easy to think it. And Salome said, The simple alone is pleasurable. One need not think about it. I replied, Elijah, you need not contemplate it at all. It is not to be thought. It is to be viewed. It is to be viewed. It is a painting. And to Salome I said, Salome, it is not true that only the simple is pleasurable. Over time it is even boring. In truth, the multiple captivates you. But Salome turned to Elijah and said, Father, it seems to me that men have outstripped us. He is right. The many is more pleasurable, and one is too simple and always the same. Elijah seemed saddened and said, What about the one in this case? Does the one still exist if it stands next to the many? I answered, That is your old and ingrained mistake, that the one excludes the many. But there are many individual things. The multiplicity of individual things is the one multiple God, from whose body many gods arise. But the uniqueness of the one thing is the other God, whose body is a man, but whose spirit is as large as the world. But Elijah shook his head and said, "That is new, my son. Is the new good? What was is good, and what was will be. Is that not the truth? Has there ever been anything else? And was what you call new ever good? Everything remains the same if you give it a new name. There is nothing new. There can be nothing new. How could I then look ahead? I look at the past, and therein I see the future, as in a mirror. And I see that nothing new happens. Everything is but mere recurrence of what has been since time immemorial. What is your being? An appearance, a darting light. Tomorrow it is no longer true. It is gone. It is as if it never was. Come, Salome, let us go. One is mistaken in the world of men." But Salome looked back and whispered to me. To me while leaving. Being and multiplicity appeal to me, even if it is not new and not eternally true. Thus they disappeared into the dark night, and I returned to the burden signified by my existence. And I sought to do everything correctly that seemed to me to be a task, and to take every way that seemed to me to be necessary for myself. But my dreams became difficult and laden with anxiety, and I did not know why. One night my soul suddenly came to me as if worried, and said, "Listen to me. I am in a great torment. The son of the dark womb besieges me. Therefore your dreams are also difficult, since you feel the torment of the depths, the pain of your soul, and the suffering of the gods." I answered, "Can I help? Or is it superfluous that man elevates himself to being a mediator of the gods? Is it presumption, or should a man become a redeemer of the gods after men have saved through the divine mediator? After men are saved through the divine mediator." "You speak the truth," my soul replied. "The gods need a human mediator and rescuer. With this man paves the way to crossing over and to divinity. I gave you a frightening dream so that you would turn to the gods. I let their torment reach you so that you would remember the suffering gods. You do too much for men, since they are the masters of your world. You can, in effect, help men only through the gods, not directly. Alleviate the burning torment of the gods." I asked her, "So tell me, where do I begin? I feel their torment and mine at the same time, and yet it is not mine, both real and unreal." "That is it. That is where separation should occur," my soul replied. "But how? My wits fail me. You must know how." "Your wits fail quickly," she retorted, "but the gods need precisely your human wits." "And I the wits of the gods," I added, "and thus we run aground." "No, you are too impatient. Only patient comparison provides a solution, not one side taking a quick decision. It requires work." I asked, "What do the gods suffer from?" "Well," my soul replied, "you have left them with torment, and since then they have suffered." "Rightly so," I cried. "They have tormented men enough. Now they should get a taste of it." She answered, But what if the torment also reaches you? What have you gained then? You cannot leave all suffering to the gods, or else they will draw you into their torment. After all, they possess the power to do so. To be sure, I must confess that men, too, possess a wondrous power over the gods through their wits. I answered, I recognize that the torment of the gods reached me. Therefore, I also recognize that I must yield to the gods. What is their desire? They want obedience, she replied. So be it, I said, but I fear their desire. Therefore, I say, I want to do what I can. On no account will I take back onto myself all the torment that I had to leave to the gods. Not even Christ took torment away from his followers, but rather he heaped it on. I reserve conditions for myself. The gods should recognize this and direct their desire accordingly. There is no longer any unconditional obedience, since man has stopped being a slave to the gods. He has dignity before the gods. He is a limb that even the gods cannot do without. Giving way before the gods is no more, so let their wish be heard. Comparison shall accomplish the rest, so that each will have his appropriate part. My soul answered, the gods want you to do for their sake what you know you do not want to do. Four more pages. Again, I'm starting to hypnotize myself, so if I suddenly pass out here, that's why. Hello, Julie. So Dr. Jung goes on. I thought so, I exclaimed. Of course that is what the gods want. But do the gods also do what I want? I want the fruits of my labor. What do the gods do for me? They want their goals to be fulfilled, but what about mine? This infuriated my soul, and she said, you are unbelievably defiant and rebellious. Consider the fact that the gods are strong. I know, I replied, but no longer is there any unconditional obedience. When will they use their strength for me? They also want to place mine in their service. What is their payment in kind? That they are tormented? Man suffered agony, and the gods were still not satisfied, but remained insatiable in their devising of new torments. They allowed man to become so blinded that he believed that there were no gods, and that there was only one God who is a loving Father, so that today someone who struggles with the gods is even thought to be crazy. They have thus prepared this shame, too, for those who recognize them out of the boundless greed for power, since leading the blind is not easy. They will corrupt even their slaves. You do not want to obey the gods? My soul cried, astonished. I answered, I believe that has already gone on more than enough. Hence the gods are insatiable, because they have received too many sacrifices. The altars of blinded humanity are streaming with blood. But dearth makes contentment, not abundance. May they learn dearth from men. Who does something for me? That is the question I must pose. In no case will I do what the gods would have to do. Ask the gods what they think of my suggestion. Then my soul divided herself. As a bird, she swooped up to the higher gods, and as a serpent, she crawled down to the lower gods. Soon afterwards, she returned and said, troubled, The gods are outraged that you do not want to be obedient. I guess. Martin asks the question, when he says gods, are we talking about archetypes? Yes, in general, although there are also autonomous psychic entities, and they may not be complete archetypes, is what I guess. And Buzz says, has anyone read any of the works of Lord Dunsany on a similar theme? They are interesting. I have not read that, but anyway. So I'm going on with the reading now. Sorry, I chuckled. So I'm going to repeat what his soul said. The gods are outraged that you do not want to be obedient. That bothers me very little, I replied. I have done everything to placate the gods. May they do their share now. Tell them, I can wait. I will let no one tell me what to do. The gods may devise a service in return. You can go. I will call you tomorrow so that you can tell me what the gods have decided. As my soul departed, I saw that she was shocked and worried, since she belonged to the race of the gods and demons and forever sought to convert me to their kind, as my humanity would like to convince me that I belong to the clan and must serve it. When I was asleep, my soul came again, and in a dream cunningly painted me as a horned devil to terrify me and make me afraid of myself. In the following night, however, I called my soul and said to her, your trick is recognized. It is of no avail. You do not frighten me. Now speak and convey your message. She answered, the gods give in. You have broken the compulsion of the law. Therefore I painted you as a devil, since he is the only one among the gods who bows to no compulsion. He is the rebel against the eternal law, to which, thanks to his deeds, these are also exceptions. Thus, one does not necessarily have to. The devil is helpful in this respect, but it should not happen without seeking counsel from the gods. This detour is necessary, or else you will fall prey to their law despite the devil. Here the soul drew near to my ear and whispered, the gods are even happy to turn a blind eye from time to time, since basically they know very well that it would be bad for life if there were no exception to eternal law. Hence, their tolerance of the devil. She then raised her voice and cried loudly, the gods have mercy upon you and have accepted your sacrifice. And so the devil helped me to cleanse myself from commingling in bondage, and the pain of one-sidedness pierced my heart, and the wound of being torn apart scorched me. Then there's a footnote, June 1st, 1919. It was noon on a hot summer's day, and I was taking a stroll in my garden. When I reached the shade of the high trees, I met Philemon strolling in the fragrant grass. But when I sought to approach him, a blue shade came from the other side. And when Philemon saw him, he said, I find you in the garden, beloved. The sins of the world have conferred beauty upon your countenance. Now recall, as I said at the beginning of this, in this reading, the shade is Christ. So here's what Philemon said to him. I find you in the garden, beloved. The sins of the world have conferred beauty upon your countenance. The suffering of the world has straightened your shape. You are truly a king. Your crimson is blood. Your ermine is snow from the coldness of the poles. Your crown is the heavenly body of the sun, which you bear on your head. Welcome to the garden, my master, my beloved, my brother. The shade replied, O Simon Magus, or whatever your name may be, are you in my garden, or am I in yours? Philemon said, You are, O master, in my garden. Helena, or whatever you choose to call her, and I are your servants. You can find accommodation with us. Simon and Helena have become Philemon and Bacchus, and so we are the hosts of the gods. We granted hospitality to your terrible worm, and since you come forward, we take you in. It is our garden that surrounds you. The shade answered, Is this garden not mine? Is not the world of the heavens and of the spirits my own? Philemon said, You are, O master, here in the world of men. Men have changed. They are no longer the slaves and no longer the swindlers of the gods, and no longer mourn in your name, but they grant hospitality to the gods. The terrible worm came before you, whom you recognize as your brother insofar as you are of divine nature, and as your father insofar as you are of human nature. You dismissed him when he gave you clever counsel in the desert. You took the counsel, but dismissed the worm. He finds a place with us, but where he is, you will also be. When I was Simon, I sought to escape him with the ploy of magic, and thus I escaped you. Now that I gave the worm a place in my garden, you come to me. The shade answered, Do I fall for the power of your trick? Have you secretly caught me? Were not deception and lies always your manner? But Philemon answered, Recognize, O master and beloved, that your nature is also of the serpent. Were you not raised on the tree like the serpent? Have you not laid aside your body like the serpent sheds its skin? Have you not practiced the healing arts with the serpent? Did you not go to hell before your ascent? And did you not see your brother there, who was shut away in the abyss? Then the shade said, You speak the truth. You are not lying. Even so, do you know what I bring you? This I know not, Philemon answered. I know only one thing, that whoever hosts the worm also needs his brother. What do you bring me, my beautiful guest? Lamentation and abomination were the gift of the worm. What will you give us? The shade answered, The shade answered, I bring you the beauty. I bring you the beauty of suffering. That is what is needed by whoever hosts the worm. I'll read that again. The shade answered, I bring you the beauty of suffering. That is what is needed by whoever hosts the worm. And so that is the end. Now, what I would say here is that whoever hosts the worm is alive, and that is the point that Dr. Jung was making. And by the worm, Dr. Jung was referencing the serpent, which moves back and forth between the pairs of opposites, also called the serpent. And the serpent is the devil. Now, the reason that I have put this slideshow up next to me here, up here, is that you are here. Okay, that image that's on the screen right now, that little blue dot, has housed every living being that has ever been, as far as we know. That's the Earth from the other side of Saturn. And the point that is being made here is that that's all there is. There isn't anything else for us. In our lifetime, at least, and we're lucky because we're living in the Goldilocks years, but there isn't nothing else for us than the Earth and the life as we have it. And the life as we have it is filled with suffering. And so when the shade answers, I bring you the beauty of suffering, that is what is needed by whoever hosts the worm. What is meant here is that the shade brings life, Christ brings life. And I just also mention that in Buddhism there are what's called the four thoughts. And the four thoughts in Buddhism are, number one, the preciousness of human life, the beauty of human life. Number two, the certainty of death, impermanence. Number three, samsara, which is all life is suffering. And number four, karma, which is Buddhist for what goes around comes around. And in my experience, whenever I feel vengeful towards someone, I'm usually angry about something, but I know I have to do nothing about it. I know that I have no need to do anything about it because karma is perfect. And so it's not necessary for me to do anything because karma will catch up with that person who did whatever they did to me. And so I can rest in peace, not having to think of my vengeance. Now let me just add one thing, which is the epilogue here. So at the end of the Red Book, Dr. Jung wrote a brief epilogue, and it's written in handwriting on the end page of the Red Book, and it was written in 1959, so more than 30 years after Dr. Jung stopped writing in the Red Book. And the footnote reads, this appears on page 190 of the calligraphic volume of Liber Novus. The transcription was abruptly left off in the middle of a sentence on page 189. This epilogue appears on the next page in Jung's normal handwriting. This, in turn, was abruptly left off in the middle of a sentence. So this is what Dr. Jung said. 1959. I worked on this book for 16 years. My acquaintance with alchemy in 1930 took me away from it. The beginning of the end came in 1928 when Wilhelm sent me the text of The Golden Flower, an alchemical treatise. There, the contents of this book found their way into actuality, and I could no longer continue working on it. To the superficial observer, it will appear like madness. It would also have developed into one had I not been able to absorb the overpowering force of the original experiences. With the help of alchemy, I could finally arrange them into a whole. I always knew that these experiences contained something precious, and therefore I knew of nothing better than to write them down in a precious, that is to say, costly book. and to paint the images that emerged through living it, reliving it all as well as I could, I knew how frightfully inadequate this undertaking was. But despite much work and many distractions, I remained true to it, even if another possibility never, and that's the end. And Vincent asked, will this be available to view later, have kids to put to bed? The answer is yes. Adam says, rhetoric about devils and demons and things like this is more along the lines of sorcery. To me, it's like giving names to the shadows that your child sees in the bedroom at night. Well, Adam, I would say that I have direct experience with a vision of Mephistopheles. And let's see, did I put it up here? Yes, I did. So I'm going to give you a link to the video in which I described my experience. And to me, this was very real. And I'm convinced that after I've read this, what happened to it? Oh, it's way down below, I suppose. Okay, but what happened was very real to me, and so it convinced me that this is what has happened to many Christians over 2 millennia, and even going back to the time of Job, and that these things are very real. But like all religious statements of whatever kind, they are statements of the psyche and not statements of the physical world. So when you're talking about rhetoric about devils and demons, you must be talking about the physical world, because I can assure you from my personal experience that in the world of the psyche, they very much do exist, and that's what this whole reading has been about. Buzz says, interesting, Adam, that sounds almost shamanic in principle. Adam, if you want to conjure up images, it may be a way to do it, or subliminally suggest control of people. Yes, that's my point, that the church did control people by conjuring psychogenic images and scaring the wits out of them, and it certainly got my attention the night it happened to me. And then Buzz says, the mind conjures up images continually, Adam. And I would just add that Dr. Jung emphasized throughout his writing that we only think in images. And so just consider that as you go through your day. Everything that you think is some sort of image. And Buzz says, kids are the most important thing, Vincent. They are our future. I hope they sleep well. Adam says, yes, but we can't really talk to the dead, nor can we say what we think. Well, in point of fact, you actually can, because the dead are within us in some way. Okay, they have a psychic existence, a psychological existence, and they go back for us 3.5 billion years to the first single-celled organisms. And so, like prayer, which is not a prayer to God up there, but is rather a petition to the unconscious. And so, like prayer, you can talk to the dead and you can get answers from them in thoughts, dreams, and visions. So please rethink your idea there. Buzz says, what a strange Adam, as my father appears in dreams and seems real and alive to me. Very much so. And Adam says, are you saying we should base life on dreams? Buzz says, I think we do, Adam. And certainly if you read much more of Dr. Jung's work, you're going to understand that we do, in fact, base life on dreams and visions and random thoughts, for that matter. Buzz says, Shakespeare says, we are such stuff as dreams are made. And yes, and Nicholas says, nobody who ever had any wits is in danger of losing them in the process, though there are people who never knew till then what their wits are for. In such a situation, understanding acts like a lifesaver. This is from the Jung psychology of the transference. And I would say yes, and as John said in the first letter to John in the Bible, I believe it's in chapter 4, you have two streams coming from the psyche. One is good and one is bad or evil. And it's up to your ego consciousness to decide between the two streams. And Adam says, to me, spirit is about love, but this rhetoric is like stirring a witch's cauldron. Who knows what will come out? Well, that is a criticism that is made toward Dr. Jung. However, Dr. Jung wanted individuals to what he called individuate, because all of our psyches are based on opposites. That's the very source of psychic energy. And to the extent that the church has convinced us that God is all good, it sold us a bill of goods, because evil is a real power in the world. And I don't think that there's anyone that can argue to me, certainly there's no one that can argue to me, that Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin did the things they did in the 20th century, where 175 million people were killed by their fellow man. No one can convince me that they or the evil ones did so because they didn't get enough mother's milk. I'm sorry about that. And Jonathan says, karma is perfect. Well, thank you for that, Skip. You're welcome. I found that to be true. I've been run over by plenty of sons of bitches, but I never have to do anything. They always get their comeuppance at some point, and it's always so much worse than what I expected to happen to them. I'm just seeing the shadow of the American people come out on television every day, and I'm just waiting for that spring to spring back, because when it does, it's going to be a humdinger. And Buzz says, now you speak of the archetypal Pandora's box. We cannot control events. It's like trying to balance an eel on the end of your nose. It always seems interesting that people spend so much time telling God what he can and cannot do. Absolutely. Adam says, I have to learn more about Carl Jung, so I am ignorant. Please forgive me. Don't worry, Adam. All of us have to start somewhere, and there's no good place. In fairness, there's no good place to enter Dr. Jung's oeuvre. You just have to start. And I've spent the last 3 years trying to make it easy for you. So if you listen to some of our videos, there's over 830 of them on this YouTube channel, put here since June the 1st, 2016. And so there's a lot that you can get from that. And then that won't be enough. You'll need to pick up the books directly, but at least it can get you started. Jonathan says, off to delve into alchemical studies. Very good idea. Adam. Thank you, Buzz. I just see a lot of what I call misinterpretation about life because they tried to interpret from poetic stuff out of the Bible. There is one thing that I think is evil that is behind all of this. That thing is called money. I think money is a poison to mankind. Well, money is certainly a god, and amazingly, it's a sterile god, so it does not bring happiness. Martin says, I think money is neutral. Money is neutral if it doesn't become a god, let's say. But the problem is we have a materialistic society, and the law of materialism is another devil's trick, because when you get something you want, it doesn't necessarily bring happiness. And Adam says money is not a living thing, so one thinks it's neutral, but money has great power over the human mind. I would say that's correct. Martin says, I think down to the human. I look at the hyper, and Buzz, I look at the hyperinflation of the 1930s, showed money is of as important as it appears to be. Adam says, why did the Gulf oil spill happen? Because the safety valve was too expensive to purchase. Why is there so much carbon in the air? Because the oil companies are making a lot of money off of it. And Buzz says, because the end of entropy, Adam, we cannot maintain this system. It becomes beyond the economic ability to sustain it. You could equally blame the four-stroke engine and its change on the events of the 20th century. Absolutely. I mean, we can blame lots of things, but in the end, it's us that's to blame. And it is human beings of every stripe that are to blame. And so I think that the idea at the end of this book is pretty profound, in that Christ brought the beauty of suffering, because he pointed out that all of us have to be crucified on our own cross. And actually, one thing I would say is, you'll know when you're really starting to individuate when you start putting your own name on conversations like this, let's say, because then you're prepared to live with the consequences of your actions. And until that, then you're hiding behind a persona. And so, as you probably know, I put my name, Skip Conover, on everything that I do and have always done. And so I think that it's time to recognize that the first step to individuation is to take responsibility for everything that we do. Martin wants to ask a question off topic. Okay, go for it. Corey says, misinterpretation assumes you've grasped something in its entirety, which, well, I guess even the authors don't comprehend their own depths. Please always wants to blame change on a single cause. That's far too easy. Agreed. And I will agree that authors don't understand their own depths. I mean, I wrote a novel in 1993 based on an active imagination, except I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have the I didn't have the privilege of being a psychiatrist and plenty of time to figure it out. So I thought I was just having this incredible creative moment, and was connected to something which famous novelists connect to, which is in fact the case. But I didn't think of it in real Jungian terms at that time. And I didn't understand what was coming out of me. And in fact, the novel contains a number of erotic and BDSM passages in it, which do represent the shadow. There's no question about that. And because of that, like Dr. Jung, I knew there was something precious in that novel, but I couldn't explain it at that time, so I put it in my drawer for 21 years. And you are free to read it for free. It happens to be on Amazon, but it's in our Dropbox in electronic form, so you can find it, but you have to be duly warned that it does have adult content in it, so please don't read it blithely thinking that you're reading Mary Poppins. And what I will say is that my wife, for all her brilliance, the novel is the story of a young Japanese woman who was sold by her father at age 15 to pay a debt, and who rises to be the first woman Prime Minister of Japan, and what her life would have to be like in that 60-year period. And it was based on my life in Japan, where I spent 8 years in two different tranches. I went to high school there, and then I ran a company there for 5 years. And my wife, in her brilliance, refused to read this novel while it was being written. And she said that she would read it after I had had 10 other women read it. And so I had 10 other women read it. As it happened, I worked in an industry filled with women, and they read it, and to a person, everyone claimed that they loved this novel, and that's because it's based on archetypal patterns that are within women, as described by Clarissa Pinkola Estes in Women Who Run with the Wolves. And so I used her template, but I put my Japanese patina on it. And so everyone, including my mother, has loved it. All women have loved it that have read it. And I think men are too embarrassed to tell me what they think. Please always wants to blame Okay, Buzz says, it is what the Taoists call changes, Corey. Just the way that the future is changed by what is happening in the present. Martin says, it is on the Gillette razor advert, in which is heavy identity political, created by a feminist video creator, and now causing high emotion to address men on toxic masculinity and other buzzwords. I've not seen the video, but the only thing that makes people burst out of their unchangeable self is emotion. So maybe that person did the right thing, but I can't say. I haven't seen the ad, even though I've heard about it. Adam says, I agree with you a lot, except we don't realize how much our lives have changed since we left the Garden of Eden. Well, yes and no. And Buzz says, perhaps we never left Adam, and it is but an illusion. And Corey says, Adam's soul, man, became animal because Adam and Eve were never birthed, metaphorically speaking. And that was, and Mr. Stephen French says, thoughts on Jordan Peterson? Okay, well, it's certain that Adam and Eve were, is a metaphorical story based on the Torah, which is a creation story from Judaism, and there are many other creation stories around the world, and none of them go back to the true origins, because you'd have to go back 13.8 billion years to get to the true origins, and then you were up against the Creator. But in terms of those creation stories of all religions, they're Stone Age or early Iron Age men, Bronze Age or early Iron Age men who are trying to get their minds around what's happening in the world. And they came up with different ways of talking about it, but it doesn't mean that they were always right, and they certainly were not physically true. And if you're a reader of Dr. Jung, it's very likely that you've fallen out of Christian fundamentalism, for example, which insists that every word of the Bible is physically true, because Dr. Jung's position, and you can find it in paragraph 752 of Answer to Job, is that every religious statement of whatever kind, and I will put in parentheses, of whatever religion, is a statement of the psyche, not a statement of the physical world. And if you understand it in that way, then every religious statement is true. And I would add, that means every religion is true. Okay, it's true to whoever has it in their psyche, because those are psychic facts. And that's what we're here talking about. We're talking about the psychology of religion. So Arun Taylor says, could the Adam and Eve story be about the subatomic universe, i.e. protons, neutrons, electrons, etc.? And the answer to that is yes, it could be. It could be metaphorical for that. And, it's what those human beings living 3,500 years ago who wrote it down could conjure in their minds at that time. But that doesn't mean that it's physically true or was physically true as such. Nonetheless, metaphorically, if you look at what it's saying, then a lot of it is very true, but not in the way that it's said in the Bible. And Martin says, I thought the same Adam is an atom and the snake is Kundalini. And Chorus says, Adam and Eve represent the cosmic opposites that combine to create the entire spectrum of humanity in between, the archetypal man and woman. Okay, fair enough. I'm not going to comment further on that one. Adam says, here's a question. If Jesus died for our sins, then why can't we return to the Garden of Eden? Well, what makes you think we're not in the Garden of Eden, Adam? The point is right here over my shoulder, which is that pale blue dot there is everything that ever lived on the planet Earth, including every religious scholar and every war and everything. And And so that is our Garden of Eden. And that's all we got. And Norton says, I think you're taking it literally, Adam. Corey, Adam, because the final redemption is the rapture. Well, there will be a rapture, and fortunately, probably none of us will ever experience it, but about 4 billion years from now, this is going to get to be a very hot place, and there won't be any life on this planet. And so what we represent is God's consciousness, and we can use that consciousness to get our species to somewhere else, but where that is a huge question, because in order to travel at the fastest speed that any human device has ever traveled, and I think it's now New Horizon that is traveling faster than any other human device, it would take 350,000 years to get to the nearest star in the galaxy. And so that means that someone in our progeny is going to have to be willing to experience that in order to get our species out of this solar system before this solar system is nothing. And let's see. Suppose Aaron says, although the word Adam is of Greek origin. Okay. Corey, Adam, son. Read Jung's answer to Job. Yes, I highly recommend reading Answer to Job. It will rearrange your circuits. But that's the most important thing that Dr. Jung ever wrote. And he said later in life, he would rewrite all of his books. The only one he would leave unchanged is Answer to Job. And so the point is, and Christ's point is, but we did not hear him, not only was he the Son of Man, or the Son of Man, which is how he described himself during his lifetime, we are all the Son of Man, and therefore we are all the sons and daughters of God. And once we recognize that, that points us toward a new and a more important reality about the future of the human species. And that's the consciousness that Dr. Jung was talking about, that we have to raise ourselves to a new level of consciousness. And Dr. Jung said in a letter that he thought this new level of consciousness is going to take 600 years to get through to the average human being. So it is you that are going to carry it forward. Buzz said, send bacteria and viruses and let them rebuild a new species. It's called panspermia. Okay, well, that might be the answer, and just put them all on rocket ships, go different places, and let everything rebuild from the ground up. And actually, Jung said something exactly like that, which is that if everything were destroyed, it would all begin again. And so he didn't know about this idea of panspermia, but he basically said that in our DNA and in the history of life on Earth was created everything for life as it now lives. So, yeah, maybe solar, wind, or faster broadband might help. I guess it seems that I am losing, my output is too low for some reason. So you're going to experience buffering for a period of time, it seems. I don't know why that happens, but hopefully you can hear what I'm saying. Mr. Steve French, to rephrase my question in a more approachable way, do you think Jordan Peterson represents Jung's ideas accurately? I ask because Jordan is where I discovered Jung. Until now, I found your channel. And my answer to that is that in general, he does reflect it accurately. However, Jordan is besotted by the logos, and Dr. Jung was not working from the logos. He was working from the eros. And so the point is that if you're a university professor or if you're a student, you are learning the rules or you are teaching the rules, but that is not life, okay? And so a university professor can't teach you life. Only you can live your life and gain experience and learn how to go forward with your life. And so even though, as Dr. Peterson calls it, chaos is chaos, in fact, all you have to do is go into someone's house that has 3 children under 5 years old on a Saturday morning to see what I'm talking about. There's nothing logos that's going to control that. I mean, a child is a wild animal, and parents are the keepers of the wild animals that teach them how to be human beings. And so Dr. Peterson's perspective is informed by more than 20 years in psychoanalytic clinic, in which he is facing the worst trials and tribulations anyone has. And so he's facing the most difficult parts of life. And so he naturally would love to see people live by certain rules. That's all well and good. And he can offer you a rule when you're in his analytic hour, but will that solve your problem? If it's a rule, chances are it won't solve your problem. You have to, in your own experience, think and learn how much that rule applies to your life, whether it's 10% or 99.99%. And none of them work perfectly. And so books, this book is the Word, as John said. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Okay, early Iron Age men needed some structure. And so the Word provided structure for civilization at that point in time. And so this was terribly needed, as is true of all the holy books of the world. But this is just a heavy black doorstop unless you put life into it. And that means experiencing something about it in your own life. If you don't experience it, it's just words. And no amount of belief is going to help you with that. Okay, you have to have the experience, and this is why I talk about religious experience. That's why I criticize Jordan Peterson's work mainly because he doesn't emphasize the need of experience, at least not in the way that I'm talking about. And I do understand that he's writing a new book, so he will become even more famous and more wealthy, that addresses this, because I think he must have heard my criticism, at least indirectly, and he knows that it's right. And so, so in terms of representing Jung's ideas, mostly, yes, he does represent it. And, his problem is that he's a psychology professor, and so he's therefore obliged to give equal weight to every Tom, Dick, and Harry philosopher and psychologist that came down the pike. And most of those don't deserve equal measure with Dr. Jung, but you're only going to understand that if you experience it yourself. I have, and so I started to study Dr. Jung's work 32 years ago, and once I started, I could not stop. And I really don't care what the others say, because I know this is true. So anyway, I hope that answers your question, Mr. French. I don't mean to criticize Dr. Peterson. I think that he has provided I do mean to criticize him, but not in an antagonistic way, because I do think that he is providing a very real and needed function on the internet in the world, because I think that a lot of young men are not properly fathered in this world. And, and young men do need structure and do need rules. And so there's a time and place for everything. And, and we can't just always be slobs. I mean, do people care about themselves? I mean, if you find someone on, well, I'll give you an example. There's this ad that's this boy and girl are out for dinner, and the boy is wearing a yellow or a gray t-shirt that sort of hangs loose around his neck, and he looks like a slob. And he's with this perfectly respectable and beautiful young woman. And I said, man, where did we get to that point? I mean, that's a man who doesn't respect himself, let alone the young woman. And so, there's some things that are really stupid about our society right now, and people need to stop and relook at that. I mean, I think that American t-shirts are great and they're part of American culture, but some things can be carried too far, and this is why I pay attention to, even on these videos, what I wear. I mean, I wear a button-down collar almost always, and if it doesn't have a button-down collar, it has collar stays in it, and I make a point of wearing a different shirt every day so that you can distinguish between the different videos. I don't buy a new shirt every day, but I don't wear them more than one day at a time. And so, I take responsibility for my personal appearance, and all of us need to. I mean, that's I'll call that a rule of life, but it's a rule of life that can be broken to a certain extent. But we have to wake up, and to me, it's really shocking to see that ad with the young guy with the gray T-shirt, thinking that that's okay, that you can go out to dinner with a young woman dressed like that. Good grief. Okay, so Adam says, Aaron Taylor, could the answer to the riddle of 666 be the carbon atom, 6 protons, 6 neutrons, 6 electrons. Carbon is the base element of all life. I'm going to leave that as a sterile question for this channel. Buzz says, look at Jordan Peterson as discovering Jung himself. Yes, I think that's true. I mean, he certainly discovered him when he's a young man, but he also has discovered him very heavily in the last 2-3 years. He's had some experiences. Let's see. Okay, Adam, the Garden of Eden is where our ancestors lived, the hunters and gatherers. Well, once again, I refer you to the images over my right shoulder here. That's where Eden is. And it's not a historical event, it's where we live. Buzz says the best thing to do with Revelation is to leave it unread on a dusty shelf somewhere. You know, I actually thought that for a long time, but honestly, there's some very good things that Dr. Jung would approve of, but let us keep in mind what is a good point about that is that Revelation is a vision or a period of visioning that came from John of Patmos. So it's one man's vision. This isn't God's prediction of how things would end on the earth. This was John of Patmos's vision or dream or whatever it is that he wrote down, and it got taken a little bit far, but metaphorically, there are some useful things in there if you pay attention to them. I'm not going to go into it today, but you know, I think of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which uses quite a bit of terminology out of that, and also right at the end of Revelation, Christ himself is talking about the opposites and about karma in the very last chapter of Revelation. So you might want to go back and look at it in that way. Nicholas says, would you say that the beauty of suffering is a direct way of realizing happiness as temperament? And how would you see this kind of suffering in our everyday life? Well, yes, I would agree with you that it's a way of realizing happiness, and this is why it is one of the 4 thoughts of Buddhism. We all suffer, at least we suffer the loss of our parents usually, and sometimes we suffer the loss of a child, and these events of all human lives, or suffer our own death, have to face our own death at some point, and all these things are suffering, and so what you have to recognize is that is a gift, okay? That's a gift from God, and so it's on that gift that we all suffer our everyday life, but also have the happiness of our everyday life. And so that's, I suppose you can be pessimistic about it, but I choose to be optimistic about it because there's nothing else, and otherwise it would just be a rock floating around in the vast universe. Adam says he will read Answer to Job. Good. Corey says, and by the way, Adam, you can listen to it because I've both read it and done a seminar on it on the YouTube, on this YouTube channel. So if you go to the front page of this YouTube channel, you can find the playlist and just listen to me reading it. I will admit that at the beginning of that playlist, I've put this numinous and synchronous experience, which actually comes up toward the end of my reading, but I wanted to emphasize that because I consider that a religious experience from my perspective, not necessarily from yours. But if you want to know what I mean by religious experience, just take a look at that one, and you will understand when I say that there is no human being that could have created that synchronicity and that experience so perfectly as it actually happened and was captured on video. And so once you see what I'm talking about, you have to listen to the very first sentence in that video and then see what happened at about 2:23 into the video, and then see my reaction to it at about 4:55. And you should look at the commentary that's underneath that. And just for your convenience, I'll give you the link to that video so that you don't have to, for those who don't have time to search around, I'll just give you the link to that video. Okay. So, of course, suffering is only that when it's in vain. Otherwise, it's a blessing when it is taken as a duty of being human. Well, also, Dr. Jung pointed out that we can suffer almost anything as long as it has meaning. Nicholas says, also, Skip, are you familiar with Michael Meade? If not, I think you might like this author and mythologist. I am familiar with him. Sadly, most of my time goes into this channel and working on Dr. Jung's oeuvre, so I don't really have time to go back and look again at Michael Meade's material, but I do think it's useful if you have the time. Corey says, I'd happily suffer in place or for anyone I love and hold more dear than myself, and that is true of most men, I think. Certainly the Marines I know would die for their brethren and for their families if called upon to do so, and I know many who did. Corey says, I suffer my kids' ignorance every day and love them all the same. Well, that's pretty good because that's the way you get them anyway. And if they're ignorant, it's not their fault, it's yours, because we as parents have to educate our children so that they aren't wild animals. Buzz says, perhaps suffering is something the brain produces in effect in order to try to make us get out of that situation. That's certainly a good way of looking at it. I mean, it's something that causes psychic energy, which pushes us in one way or another. And Corey says, anything worth living is worth suffering for. Absolutely, I agree with that. Nicholas, realistic optimist for sure. Yeah, that would be me. So Oscar Wilde said, die, that's the last thing I intend to do. Yeah, okay, but, I think that Oscar Wilde was a little bit pessimistic because for me, I don't intend for my physical death to be the end. And, one of the motivations for creating these videos originally was to leave them for my grandchildren, because my grandchildren all live far away from me, and I don't get that often an opportunity to give them any advice. I feel badly personally that I have almost nothing from my grandparents. I do have my maternal grandfather's gold watch, And I have some cufflinks and a tie tack from my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, but I really know nothing about what he stood for. I know something about his experience of life now, but that's only come to me in my dotage. And um, my maternal grandfather was a raging bigot of the late 19th century, early 20th century variety. He was born in 1881, and um, so he was essentially horribly bigoted, and if he was trying to teach me that, he failed miserably, because I recoiled from, I became the opposite of what he was in that respect. And but at the same time, I can understand what he faced in his lifetime, because he lived with us for 8 years. But he and I were like oil and water. And so I'm grateful to be here, and thank you, grandfather, for that. But I have nothing from him. And so whether my grandchildren know anything about, ever hear from me in my lifetime, I hope that they'll still have access to these videos and know what I believe, whether or not they agree with it. I don't care if they don't agree with it. As I said, I don't agree with much of my maternal grandfather's positions, but at the same time, I think it's important for grandchildren to understand where their grandparents were coming from. So that's why I do it. And Buzz says, did you see Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, where he just has a hat and a wicker case left? Yeah, boy, that goes way back, Buzz. I don't really remember that. That's an interesting point. But I always like Wandering Star from Paint Your Wagon, where where's your hat will do you. And the first word that his mother, Lee Marvin's mother, taught him was goodbye. That's the way it is. And of course, it is the way it was for my lifetime, especially when I was growing up, because I was the son of a naval officer. So we moved very often. I went to 13 different schools through high school and 10 years of university level education. And so I had to face a lot of different types of people all over the world. I was born in Mississippi, believe it or not, and I lived in Norfolk, Virginia. I lived on the Mojave Desert for 3 years. I lived in Kodiak, Alaska. I lived in a small town near Kalamazoo, Michigan called Paw Paw, and our family home was in upstate New York, and I went to high school in Japan. So that's just a sense of my experiences. And since then, I lived 8 years in Japan, and I've been to India 44 times since 1994, and to Saudi Arabia 23 times, and many other countries in between. So I've had a pretty broad experience of life, I would say. Buzz says, you became yourself, and that is a great gift. Yes, I agree. and I'm still doing it. Individuation is a process that does not end. Well worth having that scene from Burlesque and Paul Newman. It must be on YouTube. Okay. I will look for it. Maybe we'll watch that one tonight. I haven't. I remember the movie. I saw it 2 or 3 times, 30 years ago or more, and I just don't know all the details. I remember Paul Newman being quite a disturbance in that household. But anyway, okay, we've been on for an hour and 40 minutes, and I think we should cut it loose at this point. I do appreciate your being here today, and you could help me in a number of ways. One is I still am getting statistics which say that most of the people that watch these videos are not subscribers to this channel. So if you are not a subscriber and if you enjoy these conversations, I would very much appreciate you subscribing to the channel and hitting the little bell next to the subscribe button so that you can be notified when these videos are being made. And from time to time, you could think about hitting the $sign underneath the chat. That would, you could buy me a cup of coffee or something for my effort. I don't know if you're aware of the fact that YouTube is a bit of a scam for content creators, because, and you probably know, you may know that a year ago, YouTube changed its rules so that you can't even monetize your channel until you have 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of viewing in the last 12 months. And of course, that made a lot of young songwriters and so on very angry, and it caused one woman who was in that business, the songwriting business, I think, to go up to YouTube headquarters and start shooting, because she had put a lot of time and effort into their YouTube channel, and then YouTube made it so it wasn't going to be monetized until much more happened. And, that was never my biggest motivator. I mean, I'm self-motivating in doing this channel, and it hasn't depended upon finance, because if it had, it wouldn't have been done for the last 3 years with 830 videos. But when I did qualify, I found out that now that YouTube is paying me, I think as of today, it's paying me about $1.20 a day for my content with 3,000 subscribers. And so about every 3 months, they send me $100. And so all of you could help the content creators on YouTube by, one, joining YouTube Red, which costs $10 per month. But what it does is it allows you to view YouTube videos without advertising, and the videos that you watch as a YouTube Red member then get to share your $10. So if you spend 20% of your YouTube time on my channel, I would get $2 a month out of your subscription that way. That's a good way to do it. And by all means, do support your YouTube creator community, because people are putting a lot of time and effort into this, and YouTube gets to sell the content to advertisers, but we don't get to. And the other way is that you can join our advanced reading group, and for that we ask a $10 a month contribution through Patreon, or through, you could do it through PayPal. We currently have 35 members of our advanced reading group, which is a seminar that we do on Zoom every Wednesday at 1:30. You don't have to be in attendance to participate, and I think this week we are going to conclude 31 seminars on ion, researches into the phenomenology of the self, and all those videos are available in the advanced reading group Dropbox. And then in early February, I expect to begin a 1-year project of seminars on Mysterium Conjunctionis, and there seems to be a demand for that out there. So it will be a major task for me to put together those seminars, because I consider it an obligation to try to do it in a way that would comport with a graduate level course in a university. And so that's why I'm doing it. And, there are only a couple of universities in the country that actually cover Dr. Jung's work, in addition to the C.G. Jung Institutes. And I tried in my local community to do adjunct teaching on Jung, and I found that I couldn't break through, that the other schools of psychology have shut down Jung, and the theologians don't want to hear about it. And so that's why I was so joyful in finding Dr. Ann Belford-Ulanoff, who is now emerita professor of psychiatry and religion at Union Theological Seminary. And her books have been, except I just knocked it on the floor. Okay, so one of her books is here that I've read from recently, and that's where I got the idea of the Devil's Trick, The Wisdom of the Psyche by Ann Belford-Ulanoff. And these are terrific books, but they were aimed at Episcopal bishops, and so the information didn't really get out to the general public. And so now I'm trying to break out of those silos. And let's see. Nicholas says, I enjoyed myself. I'll try to be here next one. Corey says, my father died in my arms this past November 19th. Today is his birthday. Happy birthday, Pops. My condolences. This is the message of this scene. You are here. Buzz says, happy birthday to your father, too. I bet he's smiling at you from somewhere. And certainly he's smiling at you through your psyche. And you should accept that idea, because that is true. And Buzz says, the advanced reading group sounds fascinating. Good. I hope you join us. And you can write to me at skip.conover@gmail.com, and we'll get that organized. And so have a great evening, everyone. And And Buzz says, would it matter that my education is not that great? Absolutely not, because it makes no difference whatsoever, because I'm trying to put everything I talk about and say to anyone in a manner that can be understood. I mean, to the extent that I'm very, very deep down my depth psychology path means that I might have to explain something to you that you might not have experienced yet. But but that's what I'm trying to do, is make this work accessible to people who don't have quite as much experience or education as I do. All my education helped me not one whit with Dr. Jung's work, with the exception of the ability to read. Aside from that, it did nothing. So Martin says, thank you for your read and question and answer. My pleasure, and thank you for joining me. I'm going to sign off while the getting's good here, so thank you for joining me today.